The winter that changed the fate of the Harper sisters arrived quietly. Snow rested along the rooftops of their small wooden house like a tired blanket, and the wind whispered through the loose boards of the porch as though it knew secrets the world had forgotten. Inside, the house was nearly empty. Their father had died the previous spring after a fever swept through the town. Their mother followed only months later, leaving behind nothing but debts and 4 daughters who now faced a future that felt as cold as the frost gathering on the windows. Clara stood near the fireplace, reading a newspaper clipping she had already read a dozen times. The fire was weak, barely alive, and the room smelled faintly of burnt wood and damp wool. Margaret leaned over the kitchen table, adding numbers in a small notebook as if sheer determination might make the figures change. Eliza brushed her long blonde hair in front of the cracked mirror, trying to maintain some piece of the life she once imagined for herself. And in the corner of the room sat Anna. She was the youngest of the 4 sisters, wrapped in a faded shawl, quietly sewing a tear in Clara's coat. The needle moved carefully through the cloth. Anna always worked carefully. She had learned patience young, especially after the accident that left her walking with a slight limp. Clara lowered the newspaper slowly. Her voice broke the silence. There is only one way out of this. Margaret didn't look up from her numbers. There is no way out, she muttered. We owe too much. The bank will take the house by spring. Clara stepped forward and placed the newspaper on the table. Margaret's pencil stopped. Eliza turned from the mirror. Anna looked up from her sewing. Printed in bold black ink were the words that had been circling Clara's thoughts for days. A prosperous cattle rancher in the Western Territories seeks a wife. The advertisement continued beneath. Owner of a large cattle ranch. Financially secure. Seeking a respectable woman willing to build a life on the frontier. Below the notice was the name. Caleb Hartley. Clara folded her arms. He is wealthy, she said firmly. A millionaire by some accounts. Land, cattle, workers, everything. Margaret raised an eyebrow. And he needs a wife badly enough to advertise for one? Exactly. Eliza laughed softly. A cowboy millionaire. Her eyes sparkled with sudden interest. That hardly sounds terrible. Anna looked back down at the coat. She was mending. Only one woman can marry him, Margaret pointed out. There are 4 of us. Clara smiled slightly. That problem solves itself. The room grew quiet again. Everyone understood what she meant. They would travel west, and the best among them would win the marriage. Anna kept sewing, though her fingers had slowed. Clara turned toward her. You'll come too. Anna blinked. Me? Yes. Margaret closed her notebook. Why? Clara shrugged. Because 4 sisters traveling west look respectable. And because if only one of us is chosen, the others will still need a place to stay until we figure out what comes next. Eliza tilted her head toward Anna. She won't be chosen anyway. The words were spoken lightly, but they carried the sharp edge of truth everyone already knew. Anna lowered her gaze. She had heard similar words her entire life. Plain, quiet, too timid, too slow, too different. The limp made sure of that. Clara waved a hand dismissively. Exactly. She will not complicate anything. Anna placed the finished coat neatly on the table. If you want me to come, she said softly, then I will. The truth was simple. She had nowhere else to go. The journey west began 2 weeks later. The train station bustled with smoke, shouting porters, and travelers clutching luggage, and hope in equal measure. The Harper sisters stood together on the platform wearing their best dresses, though the fabric had been carefully mended more times than anyone could count. Clara's chin was lifted high. Margaret carried a small leather notebook filled with plans. Eliza adjusted her hat with delicate precision. Anna stood slightly behind them, holding a small carpetbag. The train whistle screamed across the cold morning air, and with it began the long road toward a life none of them truly understood. Days passed as the train carried them farther west. The towns grew smaller. The forests gave way to open plains that seemed to stretch forever beneath enormous skies. Anna spent most of her time by the window. She watched the land change, Rolling hills, frozen rivers, distant herds of cattle moving slowly across the prairie. Everything felt vast, wild, uncertain. Clara, meanwhile, practiced smiles in the reflection of the glass. Margaret studied ranch ownership from borrowed pamphlets. Eliza daydreamed about dresses she imagined the wealthy cowboy might buy her. "You should sit straighter," Clara told Anna one afternoon. Anna blinked. "What? If you slouch like that, he'll think you lack confidence." Anna straightened quietly. Margaret glanced over. "It won't matter much anyway." Eliza giggled. "I doubt he's looking for someone who limps." Anna said nothing. She simply turned her gaze back to the endless prairie outside. But she did not cry. Anna rarely cried. She had learned long ago that quiet endurance carried more strength than tears. By the time they reached the Western Territories, winter had begun to fade. Dust replaced snow. Wind replaced silence. The sisters completed the last stretch of the journey by wagon. The ranch appeared on the horizon late one afternoon. Anna saw it first, a sprawling stretch of land beneath a golden sky. Large barns stood against the prairie wind. Herds of cattle dotted the fields like dark shadows moving across the grass. A wide ranch house stood near a grove of cottonwood trees. It was bigger than any home the sisters had ever seen. Clara inhaled sharply. "So it's true." Margaret whispered, "He really is wealthy." Eliza smiled dreamily. "I think I shall like the West." The wagon rolled toward the ranch house, wheels crunching over gravel. Several ranch hands paused in their work to watch the arriving wagon. And standing near the porch was a tall man. He wore a worn hat, dusty boots, and a weathered coat. The sun sat behind him, casting his figure in shadow. The wagon stopped. The man stepped forward slowly. He removed his hat. His voice was calm. "Miss Harper, I presume." Clara stepped down first, smiling with practiced charm. "Yes, Clara Harper." She gestured toward her sisters. "These are my sisters, Margaret, Eliza, and Anna." The man nodded politely. "I'm Caleb Hartley." The name carried quiet weight. The wealthy rancher. The man whose advertisement had brought them across half a continent. Anna studied him carefully. He was not what she expected. He was not flashy, not arrogant, not smooth like the men Clara admired. Instead, Caleb Hartley looked like a man carved from the land itself. Broad shoulders, sun-weathered skin, eyes that seemed to notice more than they revealed. His gaze passed over Clara, Margaret, and Eliza. Then it paused briefly on Anna, just for a moment. But something thoughtful flickered there. "Welcome to my ranch," he said. Clara stepped forward eagerly. "We're very grateful for the opportunity." Caleb gave a small nod. "Well," he said, glancing toward the wide prairie beyond the house, "frontier life tends to surprise people." His voice remained steady. "So, before anyone makes promises about marriage," he looked at each sister in turn, "you'll stay here a while?" Margaret frowned slightly. "To decide. To see if the West suits you." His gaze drifted once more toward Anna. "And to see if any of you truly belong here." The wind swept across the open land, rustling the dry grass. Behind them the prairie stretched endlessly. Ahead of them waited a future none of the sisters could yet imagine. And though no one realized it then, the quietest sister had already begun to change everything. Morning came early on Caleb Hartley's ranch. Long before the sun rose above the prairie, the world outside the ranch house stirred with quiet purpose. Hooves thudded against frozen earth, lanterns flickered in the barns, and the distant lowing of cattle drifted through the cold dawn air. For the Harper sisters, the first morning arrived like an unwelcome surprise. Clara awoke to the sound of boots moving across the porch outside her window. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and frowned. "What hour is it?" she muttered. Margaret, already sitting upright in bed, glanced at the small clock resting on the bedside table. 5. Clara groaned. That cannot possibly be necessary. But on a working ranch, the sun did not dictate the day. The cattle did, and the cattle had been awake long before the sisters. In the kitchen below, a lantern burned beside the iron stove. Mrs. Dalton, the ranch cook, moved slowly between the counters with practiced ease. She had been cooking for ranch hands longer than anyone could remember. When the sisters appeared one by one, she gave them a curious glance. "Well," she said kindly, "you're up at least." Clara forced a polite smile. "We thought we should see how things work here." Mrs. Dalton chuckled softly. "Then you'll be busy." Outside, the wind carried the smell of dust and hay. The ranch hands gathered near the barn, saddling horses while the sky slowly brightened with pale gold light. Caleb Hartley stood among them, speaking quietly with the foreman. He noticed the sisters watching from the porch. Clara stepped forward first. "Good morning, Mr. Hartley." Caleb tipped his hat, politely. "Morning." Margaret joined her. "Is there anything we can help with today?" Caleb considered the question for a moment. Then he nodded toward the house. "You could help Mrs. Dalton with breakfast. After that, there's always work." Clara's smile faded slightly. Work had not been part of the elegant future she imagined. Still, she nodded. "Of course." Anna stood slightly behind the others. She noticed a ranch hand struggling to carry a heavy crate of supplies toward the kitchen. Without saying a word, she walked down the porch steps and helped lift one side of the box. The young cowboy looked surprised. "Thank you, ma'am." Anna smiled gently. "It's lighter with two." From across the yard, Caleb noticed. He said nothing, but he noticed. Days on the ranch quickly settled into rhythm, and that rhythm revealed truths none of the sisters expected. Clara discovered the prairie was far less romantic than she imagined. Dust clung to everything. The wind never seemed to stop, and meals had to be cooked for more than a dozen hungry cowhands. One afternoon, she stood beside Mrs. Dalton stirring a pot of stew with visible irritation. "Surely Mr. Hartley could hire more help," she said. Mrs. Dalton raised an eyebrow. "He could." Clara brightened. "Then why doesn't he?" The cook gave a knowing smile. "Because he wants to know what kind of woman he's bringing into this life." Clara frowned. "Well, I'm not planning to cook for cowboys the rest of my days." Mrs. Dalton said nothing, but she remembered the words. Margaret approached ranch life differently. She spent hours asking questions about cattle prices, land ownership, and supply costs. She studied Caleb's office ledgers as though preparing to take charge of the operation herself. One evening she approached him confidently. "You could increase profits if you reorganized your feed purchases." Caleb leaned back in his chair. "Oh, yes. Buying grain in bulk during early spring would reduce your long-term expenses." Caleb nodded thoughtfully. "That might be true." Margaret smiled with quiet satisfaction. But after a pause, Caleb added calmly, "Of course, you'd need to understand the drought cycles out here first." Margaret hesitated. The truth was she had never seen a drought. She had only seen numbers. Eliza struggled most of all. She disliked the heat, the dust, and the long hours. Her delicate hands blistered quickly when asked to help men tack or wash laundry. One afternoon, she stared miserably at a pile of dusty clothes. "I thought frontier life would be simpler." Anna, kneeling beside the wash basin, wrung water from a shirt. "It is simple," she said gently. Eliza sighed. "Yes, but it's also exhausting." Anna smiled faintly. "Most worthwhile things are." Anna found her place quietly. She worked beside Mrs. Dalton in the kitchen, learning how to bake bread and cook large meals. She repaired torn blankets and patched worn shirts for the ranch hands. She helped a young stable boy brush the horses each evening. Animals seemed to trust her immediately. One injured calf allowed Anna to sit beside it for hours while she cleaned its wound. The cowhands noticed. "Miss Anna's got a kind touch," one of them remarked. Another nodded. Animals know things. Anna never tried to impress Caleb. She simply helped wherever help was needed. Yet Caleb noticed her more and more. Weeks passed. Spring crept slowly across the prairie. Then, one evening, dark clouds gathered along the distant horizon. The wind shifted sharply, carrying the scent of rain and lightning. The ranch hands worked quickly to secure the barns. Caleb studied the sky. Storms coming. And it came fast. Within an hour, the prairie exploded with thunder. Wind howled across the open land, rattling the barn doors and whipping dust into the air. Rain followed in heavy sheets. Inside the ranch house, Clara, Margaret, and Eliza huddled near the windows, watching the storm. Lightning split the sky in jagged flashes. "This place is dangerous," Eliza whispered nervously. Outside, cowboys ran through the rain, securing loose gates and frightened cattle. Anna stood near the kitchen door, listening. Then she heard something else. A horse screaming in panic. The sound came from a far barn. She stepped onto the porch, rain instantly soaking her dress. Through the storm, she saw the barn door swinging wildly in the wind. And inside, a lantern flickered. Someone was still there. Anna turned toward the house. But the storm had already swallowed the voices inside. Without hesitation, she ran. Her limp slowed her slightly, but she pushed forward through the mud and rain. The barn door slammed violently as she reached it. Inside, chaos unfolded. A young ranch hand had been thrown against a stall wall, his leg pinned beneath a frightened horse rearing wildly in terror. The lantern had fallen, casting dangerous shadows across the hay. The boy groaned in pain. "Help!" Anna stepped forward slowly. Her voice was calm. "Easy now." The horse snorted, stamping nervously. Anna moved closer, her hands raised gently. "It's all right," she whispered softly. The horse's breathing slowed slightly at the sound of her voice. She reached the animal's neck and stroked it carefully. "Good boy, Easy." The ranch hand managed to pull his leg free as the horse settled. Anna helped him stand just as thunder crashed again outside. Moments later, the barn door burst open. Caleb stepped inside, rain dripping from his coat. His eyes immediately took in the scene: the injured boy, the trembling horse, and Anna standing between them, soaked and shaking but calm. For a moment, Caleb said nothing. He simply stared. Then he walked forward and helped the young ranch hand outside. Before leaving, he paused beside Anna. "You shouldn't have come out here alone," he said quietly. Anna looked down, embarrassed. "I hurt him." Caleb studied her rain-soaked face. "You could have been hurt." She shrugged gently. But he wasn't. Something in Caleb's expression softened. He looked at her differently now, not with curiosity, but with respect. Later that night, the storm finally passed. The prairie lay quiet beneath the moonlight. Inside the ranch house, the sisters gathered around the fireplace once more. Clara spoke confidently. "I believe Mr. Hartley is quite taken with me." Margaret shook her head. "He values intelligence." Eliza smiled dreamily. "I think he appreciates beauty." Across the room, Anna sat quietly mending a torn coat beside the fire. She did not join the conversation. She had never imagined Caleb Hartley might choose her. But somewhere beyond the warm glow of the fireplace, a thoughtful rancher stood on the porch beneath the stars. And for the first time since the sisters arrived, Caleb Hartley was no longer thinking about beauty, charm, or clever words. He was thinking about courage, and about the quiet young woman no one else seemed to notice. Spring had finally claimed the prairie. The last traces of winter had melted into the soil, leaving the land breathing again beneath long stretches of blue sky. Wild grasses rolled in soft waves across the open plains, and the cottonwood trees near Caleb Hartley's ranch house shimmered with new leaves. Weeks had passed since the Harper sisters arrived. Weeks of dust, work, and quiet observation. And though none of them realized it fully, those weeks had revealed far more than any polite courtship ever could. The ranch had a way of doing that. It stripped away illusions, and what remained was truth. On a warm evening, the ranch glowed beneath a golden sunset. Cowhands were returning from the fields, their horses slow and tired after a long day. The smell of supper drifted from the kitchen windows, and the soft lowing of cattle echoed across the valley. Inside the ranch house, Clara stood before the mirror once again, adjusting the ribbon on her dress. She had chosen her finest one. Margaret noticed. "Expecting something?" Clara smiled confidently. "Caleb asked us to gather outside this evening." Eliza turned from the window with excitement sparkling in her eyes. "You think tonight is the night?" Clara lifted her chin. "It would make sense." Margaret folded her arms thoughtfully. "Yes, he has observed us long enough. Eliza smoothed her hair and laughed lightly. Well, I suppose one of us must become Mrs. Hartley. Across the room, Anna quietly placed a folded shirt into a wooden basket. She had spent the afternoon helping Mrs. Dalton with laundry. Her dress was simple, her hair loosely tied. She had not prepared for anything special. Clara glanced at her. You could at least try to look presentable. Anna paused. I'm only coming because he asked all of us to. Clara sighed as if explaining something obvious. Yes, but appearances matter. Anna offered a small, polite smile and said nothing more. She had never cared much about appearances, not when life had always demanded something deeper. Outside, the sun slowly sank toward the horizon. The prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, glowing with warm amber light. Caleb Hartley stood near the porch rail, his hat resting in his hands. For a long moment, he simply watched the land he had built his life upon. The cattle grazing in the distance, the barns weathered by years of wind and storms, the ranch house standing steady beneath the wide sky. A home, but a home that had always felt a little too quiet. Footsteps sounded behind him. The sisters approached together. Clara walked at the front with elegant confidence, Margaret beside her with thoughtful calm, Eliza just behind them, smiling with eager anticipation. Anna followed a few steps back. Caleb nodded to them politely. Thank you for coming. Clara smiled warmly. We were happy, too. The evening wind stirred gently across the prairie. Caleb took a moment before speaking again. I've spent the last several weeks watching how each of you lives here. Margaret straightened slightly. Eliza clasped her hands together. Clara's smile widened. Caleb continued. A ranch isn't like the towns back east. His voice was calm and steady. It demands patience, strength, and a willingness to care for more than just yourself. The sisters listened carefully. Each of you came here hoping for a future, Caleb said, and I respect that. He paused. Then he looked toward the horizon for a moment before finishing. But a man only chooses one wife. Silence settled over the porch. The golden sun slipped lower. Clara's heart beat faster. Margaret held her breath. Eliza waited with hopeful excitement. Anna simply watched the prairie. Caleb turned back to them. I've made my decision. Clara instinctively stepped forward slightly. Caleb's gaze moved slowly across each of them. Then it rested gently on the last sister, standing near the edge of the porch. Anna. For a moment no one moved. Clara blinked in disbelief. Margaret frowned sharply. Eliza stared as if she had misheard. Anna herself looked around slightly confused. Me? Caleb nodded. Yes. Clara let out a stunned laugh. That must be a misunderstanding. Margaret stepped forward. You mean Anna Harper? Caleb's voice remained calm. I do. Eliza shook her head quickly. But she... Clara interrupted, her voice sharp with disbelief. She never even tried to impress you. Margaret added firmly, she has no experience managing land or finances. Eliza spoke next, almost pleading. She limps. The words hung in the air. Anna lowered her gaze slightly, accustomed to hearing them. But Caleb did not look away from her. Instead, he spoke quietly. When you first arrived, I was not searching for beauty. His voice carried across the still prairie. I was searching for someone who could stand beside me in this life. He turned toward the others. Clara, you wanted comfort. Clara's expression tightened. Margaret, you wanted control. Margaret said nothing. Eliza, you wanted ease. Eliza's hopeful smile slowly faded. Then Caleb looked back at Anna. But Anna... His voice softened. You helped my workers without being asked. Anna looked up slightly. You cared for injured animals. You worked harder than anyone here. And when the storm came, Caleb paused briefly. You ran into danger to save someone else. The memory of that night flickered through everyone's mind. The storm, the barn, the frightened horse. Caleb's gaze was steady. A ranch can survive without beauty, he said quietly, but it cannot survive without a good heart. The prairie wind moved softly through the tall grass. Anna stood speechless. I don't understand, she said finally. You deserve someone stronger. Caleb shook his head, gently. "I chose the strongest woman here." Anna's eyes shimmered slightly in the fading light. For the first time in her life, someone had looked at her not with pity, but with admiration. Clara turned away, shaking her head in frustration. Margaret sighed deeply, accepting defeat with quiet dignity. Eliza wiped a tear from her cheek. None of them had expected this ending. Caleb stepped closer to Anna. "You don't have to answer tonight," he said softly. "But if you choose to stay..." He looked across the endless land behind him. "This place will be your home." Anna slowly lifted her eyes toward the wide prairie. The wind brushed gently across her face. For the first time since their journey began, she felt something new stirring inside her. Not doubt, not fear, hope. She looked back at Caleb, and though her voice was soft, it carried a quiet certainty. "I would like to stay." Months later, the ranch felt different. Laughter echoed more often inside the house. Warm light filled the windows at night. The ranch hands spoke Anna's name with respect and affection. She moved through the house and fields with calm confidence, her limp no longer something anyone noticed, because the strength of her heart had outgrown it. One evening as the sun set once more across the prairie, Caleb stood beside the porch watching Anna walk toward the barn. The golden light wrapped around her like a quiet promise. The woman no one had wanted had become the heart of everything he had built. And for the first time in many years, Caleb Hartley's ranch truly felt like home.